I'm Rebecca, a woman who had once believed in the sanctity of marriage and the privacy of a home. I had been happily married to my husband, Robert, for 6 years, and we had built a life together in our cozy little house on Oak Street. Our love was strong, and our future seemed promising. But all that changed when Robert's family, the Larkins, decided to move into our home without asking, without warning. It was a sunny afternoon when they arrived, unannounced and uninvited. The sound of their car pulling into our driveway sent a shiver down my spine. Robert's father, Henry, emerged from the car first, followed by his mother, Helen, and their teenage daughter, Iris. They approached the front door, their expressions expectant, as if they were entitled to be here. I stepped out onto the porch, my heart racing, and confronted them. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice laced with disbelief. Henry, a tall and imposing man, barely spared me a glance. "We've decided to move in, Becca. It's more convenient for us." I blinked in shock, unable to comprehend the audacity of their actions. "You can't just move in without asking or even giving us notice." Helen, a woman with a stern expression, waved her hand dismissively. "We're family, Becca. We don't need permission." Iris, their daughter, stood awkwardly behind them, seemingly uncomfortable with the situation. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her, caught in the crossfire of her family's audacious decision. Robert appeared at my side, his expression torn between loyalty to me and his family. "Becca, we can work this out," he said, his voice pleading. I turned to him, disbelief and anger coursing through me. "Work this out? They can't just move in here, Robert. This is our home." His response was a disappointing one. "They need a place to stay temporarily. Becca, it won't be for long, I promise." I felt a surge of betrayal as Robert led his family into our home, their belongings in tow. They settled into our spare bedroom, seemingly unfazed by my objections. The audacity of their actions left me seething with anger and resentment. As the days turned into weeks, my life was turned upside down by the presence of the Larkins in our home. They made it clear from the start that they had no intention of paying rent or contributing to the household chores. Our once happy home had been transformed into a crowded and tense environment. One evening, as I cooked dinner in our small kitchen, Helen entered with a sense of entitlement that left me fuming. "Becca, we're out of milk. Go get some from the store." I turned to her, disbelief in my eyes. "Helen, you can't just order me around in my own home." She shrugged, as if my objections were inconsequential. "I don't see the problem. You're already going to the store." The tension between us simmered beneath the surface as I reluctantly complied with her request. It was a small act of defiance, a way of asserting my authority in my own home, but the situation only grew worse. The Larkins showed no respect for our privacy, barging into our bedroom unannounced and rummaging through our personal belongings. They took over the living room, monopolizing the television and leaving me with no space to unwind. After a long day, one evening, as I attempted to have a private conversation with Robert, Henry interrupted us with a casual disregard for our boundaries. "Robert, I need to use the computer. Move out of the way." Robert sighed in resignation and complied with his father's request, leaving me feeling like an outsider in my own home. I couldn't tolerate the audacity of their actions any longer. I had endured weeks of their intrusion and disrespect, and my anger had reached a boiling point. One day, as Henry and Helen settled into the living room to watch television, I decided to confront them. "Henry, Helen, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm. Henry glanced at me with annoyance. "Can it wait? We're watching our show." I shook my head, determined to assert myself. "No, it can't wait. This is my home, and your presence here is causing chaos and tension." Helen rolled her eyes, unpressed by my words. "We're family. Becca, you need to be more understanding." I took a deep breath, my patience wearing thin. "I've been understanding for weeks, but this has gone too far. You need to leave." their faces twisted with anger and disbelief, and I knew that my ultimatum had pushed them too far, but couldn't allow their audacity to go unchecked any longer. Henry's voice was laced with fury as he responded, "You can't just kick us out, Becca. We're staying here." I had expected their resistance, and I was prepared to take drastic action. "Fine. If you won't leave, then I will." With that, I stormed out of the house, determined to escape the toxic environment that had become my home. I couldn't tolerate their audacity any longer, and I was willing to do whatever it took to regain control of my life. As I walked away from the house, my heart heavy with anger and resentment, I couldn't help but wonder if I had taken the right course of action. But the audacity of the Larkins had left me with no other choice. I needed to take a stand, to assert my authority and regain control of my life. Little did I know that the best part of my revenge was yet to come. As I walked away from the house, my heart heavy with anger and determination, I couldn't help but feel a sense of liberation. The audacity of the Larkins had pushed me to the brink, and I was determined to regain control of my life. I found refuge with a friend who welcomed me into her home with open arms. She offered me a place to stay and a sympathetic ear as I poured out my frustrations and grievances. It was a relief to be away from the toxic environment that had become my home. Days turned into weeks, and I began to rebuild my life away from the suffocating presence of the Larkins. I secured a job and started saving money, determined to regain my independence and find a place of my own. Meanwhile, the Larkins were left to fend for themselves in the house they had invaded. Robert had been torn between loyalty to his family and his love for me, and he had chosen to stay behind, attempting to mediate the situation. One evening, as I checked in on Robert, our conversation was tense and strained. "Becca, you need to come back home," he pleaded. "We can't go on like this." I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. "Robert, I can't live with your family audacity any longer. They need to leave." His response was a disappointing one. "Becca, they won't leave voluntarily. We need to find a way to work this out." I knew that reconciliation was a distant possibility, and the thought of returning to the toxic environment of our home filled me with dread. But I couldn't deny the lingering love I felt for Robert, and I was torn between my desire for independence and my longing for our relationship to survive. Days turned into weeks, and my relationship with Robert became strained and distant. We spoke on the phone occasionally, but the specter of his family's intrusion hung heavily between us. One evening, as I was about to head to bed in my friend's spare room, my phone rang. It was Robert's voice on the other end, filled with desperation. "Becca, you need to come home. It's a disaster here." I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication at his words. The chaos and tension that had plagued our home were finally taking their toll on him, and I knew that I held the upper hand. "What do you suggest, Robert?" I asked, my voice cool and composed. He hesitated, as if unsure of how to proceed. "I've tried talking to my family, but they won't budge. They're convinced that they have a right to stay here." I smiled, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. "Well, if they won't leave voluntarily, then it's time to take more drastic measures." The plan that unfolded in the days that followed was devious and calculated. Robert agreed to play a role in it, his desperation driving him to seek a solution to the chaos that had engulfed our lives. One evening, as the Larkins settled into the living room to watch television, Robert approached them with a somber expression. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice filled with resignation. "Maybe it's time for us to find a place of our own." Their faces twisted with disbelief, unable to comprehend the implications of his words. "What are you saying, Robert?" Henry demanded, his voice tinged with anger. Robert sighed, as if burdened by the weight of his decision. "I can't take the constant tension and chaos anymore. It's affecting my relationship with Becca, and I can't let that happen." Helen's voice was laced with anger as she responded. "You're choosing her over your family, Robert?" He nodded, a sense of determination in his eyes. "I love Becca, and I can't let this destroy us." The revelation left the Larkins stunned and bewildered. They had expected Robert to choose them over me, to prioritize his family over our relationship. But my plan had worked, and the audacity of their actions had pushed Robert to the brink. He had finally taken a stand, choosing to prioritize our relationship over his family's intrusion. The days that followed were filled with tension and conflict, as the Larkins grudgingly began the process of finding a place of their own. They were forced to confront the consequences of their audacity, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. I watched with a sense of satisfaction as they packed their belongings and left our home, their faces etched with frustration and resentment. The audacity that had once driven them to invade our lives had now come back to haunt them. As the weeks turned into months, Robert and I attempted to rebuild our relationship. The wounds of the past ran deep, and forgiveness was a distant and unlikely possibility. But we were determined to move forward, to put the chaos and tension behind us. But the specter of the Larkins' audacity continued to linger in our lives, a constant reminder of the chaos and conflict they had brought into our home. Our relationship remained strained, and the path to reconciliation seemed fraught with challenges and uncertainty. One evening, as Robert and I sat in our living room, attempting to find common ground, our conversation took a dark turn. "Becca, I can't help but feel like this is all your fault," he said, his voice accusatory. I blinked in shock, unable to comprehend the audacity of his words. "My fault. Robert, they invaded our home without asking, without warning." His response was filled with bitterness and resentment. "You should have been more understanding, Becca. You pushed them away." I felt a surge of anger and frustration rise within me. The audacity of his accusation left me seething with resentment. "Robert, I stood up for our home and our relationship. I won't apologize for that." And with those words, our fragile attempt at reconciliation crumbled. The specter of the Larkins' audacity had irreparably damaged our relationship, leaving us with no choice but to part ways. As the years passed, we went our separate ways, our love shattered by the audacity of his family's intrusion. The bitterness of betrayal had left an indelible mark on our lives, and the path to reconciliation remained obscured by the darkness of our past. And so, the audacity of the Larkins had wreaked havoc on our lives, tearing apart a love that had once been strong and promising. The years rolled on, and the wounds inflicted by the Larkins' audacity refused to heal. My life had taken a different trajectory, one far removed from the chaos and tension they had brought into my home. I had found a new sense of independence and purpose. My career had blossomed, and I had surrounded myself with friends who supported and cherished me. The bitterness of betrayal had left an indelible mark, but I had learned to move forward, to rebuild my life in the wake of their audacity. As for Robert, he had struggled to find his footing in the aftermath of our failed relationship. The specter of his family's audacity had haunted him, and he had been unable to form meaningful connections with anyone else. One evening, as I sat in my comfortable and quiet home, my phone rang. It was Robert's name flashing on the screen, a name I hadn't seen in years. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered the call. "Becca, it's Robert," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I need your help." I couldn't deny the sense of satisfaction that washed over me at his words. The audacity of his family's intrusion had left a lasting mark, and I was curious to hear what he needed from me. "What do you want, Robert?" I asked, my voice cool and composed. He hesitated, as if unsure of how to proceed. "I've hit rock bottom, Becca. I need a place to stay. Just temporarily. I promise it won't be for long." I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication at his words. The audacity of his family's intrusion had come back to haunt him, and he was now in need of my help. I agreed to let him stay in my spare bedroom, a small act of generosity in the face of the chaos and tension they had brought into my life. But as the days turned into weeks, Robert's presence in my home began to wear on me. The bitterness of betrayal had left an indelible mark, and the specter of his family's audacity still haunted me. One evening, as I sat in the living room, Robert approached me with a somber expression. "Becca, I've been thinking. he began, his voice hesitant. "Maybe we can try to work things out." I couldn't help but feel a sense of resentment at his words. "Robert, it's too late for us," I replied, my voice tinged with bitterness. "The audacity of your family's intrusion destroyed our relationship." He nodded, his face filled with regret. "I know, Becca. I just thought—" But his words trailed off, a sense of resignation settling over him. The audacity of his family's intrusion had left us with scars that could never fully heal. As the weeks turned into months, Robert continued to stay in my home, his presence a constant reminder of the chaos and tension that had once engulfed our lives. One evening, as we sat in the living room, a heated argument erupted between us. The bitterness of betrayal had left an indelible mark, and the specter of his family's audacity continued to haunt us. "Becca, I can't help but feel like you're holding a grudge," Robert accused, his voice filled with frustration. I couldn't deny the anger and resentment that still simmered beneath the surface. The audacity of his family's intrusion had forever altered the course of our lives, and forgiveness remained a distant and unlikely possibility. "Robert, the audacity of your family's intrusion destroyed our relationship," I replied, my voice filled with bitterness. "I can't just forget that." And with those words, our fragile attempt at reconciliation crumbled. The specter of his family's audacity had irreparably damaged our relationship, leaving us with no choice but to part ways once more. In the end, the audacity of the Larkins had left a lasting legacy of bitterness and regret. Our love had been shattered by their intrusion, and the path to reconciliation remained obscured by the darkness of our past. And so, our story came to a dark and bitter conclusion, a testament to the destructive power of audacity and betrayal. Love is fragile, and once broken, it may never be whole again.